Nathan Buckley gets us underway on a Tuesday. Hello, Bucks.
Gerard, how are you?
I'm well.
There's going on, isn't there?
There is. There's a lot of stuff for us to discuss. You're an acquittal guy, I think, typically. What happens tonight in your eyes?
I have many different trains of thought going on, as most people would. I actually think that the contest is something that I reckon is a part of the game. I think that Paddy Cripps was well within his rights to try and go and win the ball. I also believe there was a part of him that wanted to make a statement and that there was a physical contest to be a part of, and that he would have thought in his mind that he was attacking the football and collecting a Brisbane Lions player at the same time. So if that's in his duty of care, well then I think that he's probably fudged that line a little bit to try and make a stand in the status of the game. The same way Michael Voss would have, the same way Lee Matthews would have, the same way Jonathan Brown would have, who happened to be three players who immediately, or three ex-players who immediately said, and Vossi's got some skin in the game, who immediately said that contest is a football action. So I think that I can see that side of it, but the way that the legislation is written about carelessness and recklessness, I wasn't surprised by the adjudication that came down. Was there an alternate way to contest that ball, do you think? There's always an alternate. No, actually, there wasn't. There weren't many alternative ways to contest the football. There were plenty of alternative ways to not contest the football. And that is the issue that I have, is that for players to be clear of this careless, reckless stamp that's put on some of these contests, even some of the tackles that we're seeing, under the guise of protecting the head, which I understand and I accept, but we are playing a contact game of football. So to absolve yourself of the carelessness and recklessness that sometimes is brought down by a tribunal to explain its decisions, you actually have to not compete. And to not compete, I think, is taking away the essence of the game. So this one is very similar to the Willie Rioli one in that sense. The difference between marking and winning possession, I think, is moot. And I agree with some pundits, and I heard Rui's statements last night, and that is that there is a precedent there. And Carlton have every right to go with that precedent. And if that was successful, there's a very real possibility that Carlton could be as well. Yeah.
So in your eyes, does Cripps contest the ball the whole way? So the legalities play a role tonight. Is if at any point he's no longer contesting the ball, then he's going to be suspended. That's actually the Rioli precedent. So is there a moment where he's no longer contesting the ball?
Not to my eye.
Yeah. And it'll be three former players who are charged with making that decision tonight.
And I suspect that all three of them. Well, I don't know. I'm not saying that everyone will think about it like that, but I do believe that there was an intent for some physicality in that contest, and I think he's well within his rights to be that. So whether that intent for physicality takes away his right to stand up and say, "Hey, it was a football action," because a player is concussed in the contest, well, that may well be the case. As soon as you decide to impose your physicality, and it's done so in a way that causes injury to an opposition player, can you just listen to me talking? You're not allowed to cause injury to an opposition player. Now, this game of football has been a test of mental, emotional, and physical attributes for its entirety of its existence. It has been somewhere where people choose to enter into the arena to test themselves. It is so much better than it was when king hits were happening behind play. We don't see that anymore. The game is fairer than it's ever been. But if we remove the physicality, if we remove the contest, it's a different game.
Yeah. So I think there's a difference between the contest and what you're talking about. And I listened to the Buck Stops yesterday, is if Cripps has gone in to physically impose himself for the good of the team, for the show of the leadership, then he is culpable for the concussion that he causes. You're not entitled to do that to an opponent. And if you do, you wear that.
Yes.
So the risk is I'm going to cannon into him.
Yes.
And I'm going to be culpable for the consequence. If he gets up, great example, on we go, chest out, see if we can get a lift out of the team. If I leave him concussed, the legislation of the game is going to hold me culpable for it.
And I can't disagree with any of what you've just said. And in my stream of consciousness as I was speaking yesterday, I actually said when you want to impose yourself and you go lower and harder than your opposition, and that wasn't the case.
No.
It was actually higher and harder, and that brings into it some contact that we know is prohibited. So, I mean, I think about Michael Voss, I think about Scott Burns, I think about Joel Selwood, I think about these guys that have been leaders and have been physical presences for their physical presence for their teams and for the people around them, and they've generally imposed themselves when there's a 50-50 ground ball, and they just go harder and lower than their opposition, and they impose themselves on that contest. And Jack Viney's another one, and therefore it emanates into an expectation of how you're going to approach your next contest. So I think I have to believe that there's a bit of that in Paddy Cripps, and I think there is. Whether it was the right time, right place, don't know, probably not. And it wasn't lower and harder. And these days, the lower and harder is nearly taken out, because if you go lower and harder than someone and they happen to have their head over the ball and you beat them, or you're too hard, you're going to get penalised as well. So there's so many more things having to go through a player's head when they contest a football in today's game than ever before.
And the last one on this, which I suspect will be part of the case tonight, is are there some contests where you just have to accept that you are going to be the tackler, that you are going to arrive in such a manner that it's time to tackle? Sometimes you're the tackler, sometimes you're the tacklee, and you do have to make that decision on your way to the contest.
Yes, there are. Absolutely there are. And I think the margin for that is probably greater than it's ever been before. So there's probably more grey area in there. And I don't know whether that makes the decisions any easier or not, because we're actually asking players to make the decision earlier on whether they're tackling or not. But if both players decide that, we're going to be dancing around a loose football.
Yes, yeah.
And that's not what we want to see. But some things just occur as well. So if that was marginally later, Patrick Cripps could have made a really strong statement by allowing Archie to take the football, putting his shoulder into his ribs and driving him 3 or 4 metres back and then into the deck. Now, I can still potentially see that action, if it concusses Archie, being something that people want to talk about.
Yep.
But yes, I think sometimes you need to give the contest away in today's footy, which is counterintuitive to the way that I know that I was taught to play the game.
So you'll have your views. There's plenty coming through. 0433 98 11 16. Temper a mattress like no other, and we'll take some calls. It is, as I say, these tribunal hearings are not predictable. They haven't been in recent times. There's there are the rules. There's an understanding, and then there are ones that change things along the way. This is in the margins. I feel like he'll be unsuccessful. There are plenty of people who will tell you that he should be successful. So we'll learn a bit out of the way that it comes back.
It's longer.
He's resolute, Ken Hinkley, and if he does get called in, he will be blindsided if Port Adelaide changes its mind. Nathan, I asked you to have a listen to David Koch in his regular slot on 5AA yesterday, and then that was Ken last night. Obviously, these are scenarios that you not only know, but you've lived as well. Where's your eye drawn?
I thought both leaders handled it pretty well. I mean, I think Kochie is well within his rights to say that we're not satisfied where we're at this moment, and that we will do everything that we need to do to make the changes that we need to make to be able to climb back up to where we feel we rightfully should be. And that is a Port Adelaide mentality. Yeah. It always has been. And there's a reason that they have been so successful, and that's because their expectations of success are very high. But I thought Ken handled your questioning really well off the back of the comments by his president. And they seem to be aligned in regards to the fact that they both understand there needs to be improvements in their football program, that they need to be able to get to the bottom of where this year has come from, how it came about. Now, there's been a lot of speculation on the start of the year, on the recent form 1-4 when the season is up for grabs. One thing Ken said was interesting. We will be assessing the football program, but today's not the day for that. Today, every day is the day for assessing your football program, and this is what I believe that we lose outside of a club environment. It is never black and it is never white. It is always somewhere in between, and everyone is being assessed every day in a high performing elite environment, and nearly everyone falls short often enough that there's growth to be seen and to be had, and that's where the rub is. So when that leaks out, when the queries and the questions leak out, and we start trying to speculate on what is actually going on in there, we push it to either black or white, yes or no, and we think that potentially we get people in our crosshairs, and we believe that person is a cancer, needs to go. So I don't think that this looks like that the leadership has handled this quite well. I thought those two interviews are quite strong. They're actually quite aligned in regards to not being satisfied with where we are and we need to be better. And it's now I'm going to be up to Port Adelaide how they handle that, not necessarily over the next 2 weeks, but how they handle it over the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks to make the changes that they believe they need, and they are in the best positions to make those determinations.
What role does the public environment play then? So there has been a rising tide in South Australia. I don't quite understand Port Adelaide. I haven't lived in the town, but you've had first-hand knowledge of it. Is there has been agitation, I think, against Ken from the earlier stages of the season. That 5AA interview suggested that it was now much more widespread than the hardcore militant who want Ken out. And there's pressure on the club from that point of view, and that's what was driving the questioning of David Koch. Are you going to bow to the public will, or are you going to stick with your guy?
Yeah, I think one thing that can't be disputed is that no one at Port Adelaide, or a supporter of or a lover of the club, would be happy with not playing finals this year, especially with their run of being a club who's probably been a top 4 club for the most part in Ken Hinkley's reign. So that's everyone's united in that. But in terms of transparency to what is actually happening internally, very few people have all of the evidence in front of them. But more people than that are making determinations on what should happen without available evidence. So I think it's it sort of nearly comes back to the responsibility of the spokespeople for the organisation to be really clear with their disappointment, or with this is less than we'd expected. This is not where we want to be, and then it's their capacity to make the right change in a vacuum. Nearly, they need to do it in a vacuum, because I don't think anyone external to the organisation, as passionate as they might be, would understand it as well as the people within it.
Is it a hard road to walk? So Ken's lived the scrutiny since round 3. I think you could date it back to round 3. He's lived the scrutiny the whole season, and he will inevitably live the scrutiny next season, whether it succeeds or fails. So he's going to back himself to succeed and get the next contract. The first half of the season is going to be all based in the same conversation that Leon Cameron lived. You come into a season in your final year of a contract, and you lived this too, is how's the results play a role in whether you're going to keep your job or not. Can that be counterproductive?
Well, the scrutiny is lived from the moment you step into a public office. So it's not just when there are calls for your removal, or the belief, either justified or unjustified, that you are holding the club back, or this person is holding the club back, or this person is stopping us from being our best. We need someone better in this role. So I think that Ken has lived scrutiny senior coaches do live scrutiny, I think above their influence, to be honest, because there are more people in a football department that have great influence on performance. And that's probably where David Koch and Ken Hinkley were united in their statements, is that we will have a look at our football program and where these contributions are coming from and what is falling short. And it'll probably be a long way from what people expect. All we all end up going to is the win-loss at the end, which is a product of the things that need to change or the things that can be improved. So yes, I have lived it, and yes, it will continue to be the same because it's a passionate, emotive sport, and we feel a connection to our football clubs and to our teams, unlike most. And we have a media who are happy to scrutinise and try to project forward onto what this might mean, and it fills our heads and our hearts, and it becomes even more compelling than what the leaders in the organisation might actually be telling us. There is a little bit of a cancel culture that takes place, and that once that starts in motion, it can be difficult to stop.
And true around the world as well. So one of the interesting phenomena, I think, that I think we spoke about privately rather than publicly, is longevity is the measure of success in the AFL world on a coaching front. Abnormal to what happens the rest of the way around the world is the scrutiny is severe and the tenures are short. Bang, out, bang, on to the next one, out, onto the next one, out, onto the next one.
Yeah, so which doesn't give the chance for the external opinion to build to the levels that it does in our environments.
Yeah, so Ken, 10 years with an 11th, and he's hoping for more. And that agitation that exists there is not going to be placated. I just think it's an interesting, it's not unique, but it is amplified here against what happens the rest of the way around the world.
I think the difficulty with an AFL, with leadership in AFL clubs is, and I think we forget this, we are an elite program asked to develop our talent, both on and off the field. Well, not so much off the field. You're getting people at the top of their game off the field because they've got the chance to develop that experience. But we are bringing in young players at the age of 18, and sometimes we bring in mature recruits, and we wonder, do we ever stop to wonder why the mature recruits seem to go well at a disproportionate rate? Because they are more mature and they are more developed. But we're juxtaposed between a development organisation, so you're building half of your list or more, and a performance organisation, half of your list or less.
Yeah.
So you're going to be at different stages contending and not contending. But we don't accept that as supporters because we only see this as a win-loss industry. So we forget that the leaders that are at our club are charged with developing our players, but we're going to judge on win-loss. So that juxtaposition is often forgotten. And over a long enough timeline, you go through different phases, where you can contend or you can't, or you might have challenges that are thrown into the mix that are just insurmountable at that time, and you underperform compared to expectations. That doesn't, and we want to jump on that real quick, but that doesn't mean that things are broken. It just means that there needs to be a slight shift and an adjustment, and then away you go. It might be the spice. The salt and pepper that needs to go in just to make something pop, and that makes a big difference. But we forget about the fact that you've got to develop at the same time.
Nathan Buckley in the studio on a Tuesday. Steve's in Lilydale on the Ken Hinkley front. Steve, welcome.
Yeah, hi Gerard, hi Nathan. It's nice to talk to you both.
Okay, Steve.
I'll declare my hand. I'm an Adelaide supporter, so I'm by no means am I unbiased. But there are a couple of fictions I think that need to be corrected, Nathan, by what you said before.
Yep.
You said that Port Power are a successful AFL club. Well, they've won one flag in 26 years, and they've been nothing but mediocre, really, for the rest of their tenure since they've been in the AFL. They were a successful SANFL team, but by no means they've been nothing more than mediocre since they made the AFL. And then you also said that Ken Hinkley has had them in the top four for the vast majority of his tenure. Well, they've played finals 3 times in the last 8 years. So by no means can you call that a successful tenure or a successful club. So I just think that like, sometimes we get caught up in the whole history of Port Power when they're in the SANFL, but it simply hasn't transposed to the AFL, and I think that needs to be cleared up.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for declaring your Adelaide bias on that before you said that. But there's no doubt that Port Adelaide as an SANFL club brought that attitude of expectation, and I've got no doubt and stand by the fact that I think that has flipped across to their AFL organisation, and the expectation to perform has always been there, and the expectation for success and to win, but they haven't been able to follow through the same way that they did at the SANFL level.
Top two in the past 2 seasons is success, though. I can't just have success being measured by the cup that's won. There's more than one successful team every year.
What you just said is not a commonly held view, though. There's one winner and there's 17 losers. But there is, given the juxtaposition we spoke about development and either being in the window or not in the window, and having to graft a list, an organisation together with good people, it does take time.
Steve, thank you. Daniel's in Warrnambool. Hello, Daniel.
Morning, guys.
Morning, Daniel.
So I've just got a couple of questions, like your thoughts on the Paddy Cripps incident. So the way I saw it was 2 players going for the same ball in the air, and Cripps selected to jump to try and reach the ball first. Archie stayed down and came off second best. So do you think that if Cripps was also concussed, he would have been cited by the MRO? And why is the sole responsibility of the outcome of that contest on Cripps? Is it because he's the bigger body?
No, I would suggest in that particular contest, Daniel, that that Archie's not aware. You know, he should be aware of contact, the possibility of contact at all times on the football field from 360 degrees. But he didn't have visibility of what was coming the other way, and it's only Paddy Cripps that did. So to say that it was a 50-50 contest would not be accurate. I think that Archie wasn't able to watch the ball and his man, but Paddy Cripps was. So whatever that counts for, I think that would be my view of the contest.
And we had a case earlier in the year, a Collingwood player inflicted concussion on himself and got suspended for, was it the Callum Ward incident? Anyway, so yes, your point.
Nathan Kruger.
Yeah, it doesn't. If Cripps had been concussed, he would still be culpable at the first step for the contact that was made. And Steve's in Melton. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, guys. On the Cripps thing, I just want to compare 2 actions from over the past weekend. So the Friday night one, Braden Maynard, that last quarter tackle. He could have elected the bump. He went the tackle, made a fair tackle, hurt the player, and no suspension. Cripps leaves the ground, elects the bump, takes the head, knocks the player out. It's an illegal action that's caused the concussion. That has to be 2 weeks. It has to be 1 week for the illegal action and a week for the concussion. So I don't know why they're going to the tribunal wasting time.
Yeah, well, they're going because their season's on the line and they want their captain, and there is a way to argue it. I think your point's a reasonable one, Stephen, and that's at the heart. Was there an alternate to Cripps? Well, you could roll, if you wanted to, the Maynard example and say, well, this is an alternate to what you did.
I don't agree with that because there was no way that Braden was going to get his hands on the footy. He had no option other than to tackle. So that was outside that grey area that we would have discussed. But it so happened that it provided Maynard with an opportunity to physically impose himself on that opponent, because what he wanted to do was exactly what he was legally able to do. One thing that would have been interesting is if, say, he would have carried through the contest and his shoulder drove Neil Bullen's head into the ground and then concussed him. Is he careless and reckless then? So the careless and reckless angle can be argued in many circumstances when I don't think it's actually appropriate.
Don Pike and Josh Jenkins, part of the conversation across the past 5 or 6 days surrounding the Adelaide camp. The chairman, John Olsen, issued a statement last night, co-authored by Tim Silvers, which was a more complete apology than the first attempt last week, and expressing the need to listen at the moment and offer support, and then the hope to move on, but everyone will move on at different speed after that. As you've been taking this in, Nathan, so Where are you most drawn in a complex situation?
I think the first and foremost, I'm drawn where everyone is, and that is to the wounding that is carried on by the people, the players that went through, the activities, and they when you buy into a football club, either as a player, a staff member, even as a leader, when you buy into a football club, you do acknowledge that the welfare and support of each other is first and foremost. I think the way that we've always what we've always come back to in organisations is, we're all in it together, and we'll find whether it works or whether it doesn't, whether we win or whether we lose, whether we're meeting or matching our expectations or we're falling short. We can find a way if we stick together and we work it out. So my immediate understanding of what has happened on a bigger picture is that the players didn't speak initially about it because they were still bought into the football club, and they still believed that they were responsible to keep things in-house and that it could be solved in-house. And potentially that's why the leaders, or whether it's Don Pike or whether it's Fagan, the CEO, or whether it's Mark Prosciutto or even Rory Sloane or Taylor Walker as captains, maybe that's why there wasn't a lot of public comment beyond that, because this is something that we can deal with and solve internally. And clearly it wasn't. And it's taken a long time for it to come out into the open and to be shared, those experiences and the resentment that is carried over a long period of time, to be shared in a public forum. And it was through the agency of Eddie Betts' book. And I think that's courageous by Ed. I think it's great. And you said to me off air that even after having written that, he was actually loath to speak the words when interviewed beyond that.
Yep. He'd written the words in a way, I think he'd purged his soul, and it is brave, and he didn't want to go back and restate. He really didn't want to repeat any of the words that he'd written. He just wanted that to sit there to be absorbed. People could take it but he didn't want to re-prosecute that case.
Well, even Josh, when he spoke about it, he wrote it down, and he had diary entries from way back because he was trying to purge himself of the hurt that he had felt, and that he felt that he'd been taken advantage of. That what occurred for him was improper, and I'm pretty sure there would have been conversations internally, and he even speaks about fronting Heath Uni. He speaks about fronting the coach and saying, and he's right. In retrospect, he's right. We lost the game of footy, but at the same time, Don Pike's right as well. We got it wrong. And there have been careers that have been altered. There have been a club's trajectory that has been shifted. One, because of the camp itself, but two, because of how it's been handled on the other side of it. And that has probably caused as much wounding as the camp itself, because after the camp, after things that haven't worked, there still is the opportunity for growth. There still is the opportunity for honesty, transparency, putting your hand up, admitting fault, moving on, and learning and developing from that, whether you're a leader or whether you're a player. So that second part didn't happen, and I think that causes the resentment that builds. Can you
easily understand how this happened, or do you grapple with how could that happen?
I know how it happens because it happens. It happens everywhere in every organisation because you don't get everything right. So it's this is part of the reality of what happens when the push and pull of win-loss versus the welfare and support of individuals, because there are times when challenge will come, and I see it very much like parenting. Like there needs to be some tough love at times, but if you go over that line on tough love, and a person feels like they're not supported or there needs to be a bit of friction to create resilience, to create growth. But if you can go over the top with that, even with the best intentions, and there are times when things happen in an organisation that don't satisfy that don't pass the sniff test, that need to be addressed and need to be resolved. And that's where, open communication. And the part I loved in the press conference or the release from Adelaide was everyone's going to experience this in a different way and we need to listen. That would have been great to have happened in the moment, not in the moment, but in the months beyond. But the players clearly didn't feel that was the case. And every player would have had a different experience as well. Some would have been fine with it and others wouldn't have been. So it's a vexed issue, but we're looking from the outside in, assuming A, B and C, we've got a little bit of information and we've got some really strong personal anecdotes. But I think unless you're in there, it's very difficult to know exactly what didn't happen, what should have happened, and potentially even now what the way forward is for the organisation, the people within it.
We'll talk to Patrick Dangerfield shortly from a Players Association perspective as well. 0433 98 11 16. Temper a mattress like no other. A lot of thoughts on a lot of fronts. Let me just leave our conversation today with when you get to so Carlton are nearly at the last chance saloon. They're not alone. How do you ward off the desperation and urgency, or do you channel the desperation and urgency to get what you need to finish the journey?
Well, it depends on how you've carried yourself when you've played your best football. Have you been light and breezy, or have you been tight, and have you wanted to wind each other up? And I would suspect that Carlton had a blessed run early. Well, not a blessed run. They were in great form. Their best football early in the season was as good as any. But they buffered personnel concerns as well as anyone did through that probably second quarter of the season. They're not playing as well now. For whatever reason, they're out of form. They're not connecting as well. There's elements of their game that haven't quite come together, and that was largely around transition, and that's starting to hurt them now, more so than the middle of the year. I don't know exactly how Vossi handles it, but once again, the information that you glean inside of an organisation, inside of a team, that the players will make this determination and direction as much as the coaches will, and this is where Paddy Cripps becomes crucial because he's still got a big part to play. No matter if he's playing or not, his energy and his direction and leadership around the organisation is going to be really important over these next couple of weeks. See, they could lose both games and still play finals, and I still think that's probably the most likely outcome is that they sneak in. And I don't reckon they necessarily need to win a game for that to happen. The numbers suggest that possessions 9/10, they're there, and they have to be caught. And we've seen a lot of teams lose a lot of games when we potentially expect them to win. Yep. So everyone's been falling over at hurdles, and maybe Carlton have done enough early in the season to qualify. But we'll find out in the next couple of weeks.